Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to begin with a disclaimer. First of all, this is a children's book. This is meant for someone who's about 14 years old. Second of all, these are my opinions on the book, and I'm reading it because last week we read Larklight, and the names are too similar for me to pass it up. But what I'm about to say are my own opinions, and if you would like to form your own, please buy the book and leave a review, as reviews really help authors out. I know this is a bit of an older book, but reviews really do help us authors out quite a bit. Also, for a bit of shameless self-promotion, I will be leaving a link to my own books in the description. If you would like to read what I have written and form your own opinions and leave me a review, I would be greatly appreciative. It helps me out and it helps me continue doing what I'm currently doing. Anyway, on to the book. This week we are reviewing Larklight by Philip Reeve. And a greater contrast between two books as this one and the one we did last week you will not find, but we'll get into that more a little bit later. So we're going to start off with a recap of the story, then get into the things I liked, the things I didn't like, and my general thoughts. Our story begins with Arthur and his sister Myrtle, who live in a house that orbits the moon. If that sounds a little odd to you, let me give you a little bit of context. We are in the 1800s at the height of the intersolar British Empire. At some point in the past, when Isaac Newton figured out gravity, he also figured out a means to travel between the stars, and instead of being filled with nothing, it's filled with ether, which is a very thin gas that can be breathed, and it's a children's book. I don't need to explain too much. Anyway, Arthur and Myrtle's father is a scientist of sorts, and he is expecting a visit from a Mr. Weber. And Mr. Weber, it turns out, is a giant white spider wearing a bowler hat. When he arrives, he immediately allows the rest of his colleagues inside, and they promptly swarm the house. Arthur is the first to meet this giant, monstrous spider, and immediately charges off to warn his father. The father doesn't heed his boy's advice and is immediately swarmed by these large white spiders that have 12 legs. And we know they have 12 legs because when the son is telling his father that they're spiders, his father corrects him and saying, well, no, they only look like spiders. They actually have 12 legs. In case you haven't picked it up, this is also a very British book, because the British are the only people I know who would argue about the number of legs the giant bugs that just invaded their house have. Arthur, seeing that his father might be lost, decides to go save his sister instead. His sister, who decides it's best for her to pack some stuff up before they leave. Lucky for them, they do eventually make it to the lifeboats, just as the spiders are trying to get hold of them, and launch themselves to the nearby safety of the moon. Now, the moon in this world is not the lifeless hunk of rock that has no gas and no safety on it. It's actually inhabited by mushrooms and mushroom people in this world. It's important to remember that this is a children's book and it is weird. After running into one of the natives of the moon, a little moon person who is horribly scared by Arthur's sister, who is rather disgusted by everything that's not human and proper. The only proper way to be when encountering Xenos, but that's not this universe. Bad. They end up encountering what's called a potter moth, which stings both of them, paralyzing them, and then proceeds to encase them in a ceramic pot with one of its young, given the name potter moth, as it makes pots out of moon dust and saliva, so it's like a big cocoon. Arthur and Myrtle are spared the grisly fate of being eaten by a bug, a giant bug, mind, by the arrival of Captain Jack Havoc and his crew of Xeno pirates. Yes, this is a name that could only occur in a British children's book, Captain Jack Havoc, which sounds like a name a 15-year-old would choose, and indeed it fits because, just like Arthur's sister, he's about 15 years old. Arthur, however, is not quick to believe that this is the notorious pirate Jack Havoc, who he has read so many things about, and so many horrible things have been blamed on. However, not given much of a choice, he is walked to Havoc's ship by the crew of kind of reluctant Xenos. There's a crab person and a lizard person and two sea anemone type people and a few people that have a number of arms. It's very colorful, let's just say. But their departure is hampered somewhat by the arrival of the Interplanetary British Navy, who threatened to blow him out of the sky until Havoc makes it clear that he now has hostages in the form of Arthur and Myrtle. Myrtle, who is making her displeasure at this very, very loudly known. Well, at this point, I believe she was unconscious, but before this, she had made her displeasure known. Using this distraction to escape, Jack takes them to his home base on Venus and starts to reveal his backstory, and that's where I'm going to leave the recap off. I found this book highly amusing, despite the fact that it's a children's book, and I would advise if you want to know more, please pick it up and give it a read. Let's get into the things that I like. First of all, this book is goofy and painfully British. And I will give you a prime example of both. Early in the book, when Arthur is going over all the advancements of this great interplanetary British Empire, he talks about the individual who invented the mechanical orphan. Yes, orphan as in a parentless child. He made an automaton child, not for the purpose of helping out people who can't have children, but so that it can sweep chimneys that are either too cramped or too poisonous for normal orphans to climb into. As I said, painfully British. And all the names in this book are equally British, from the names of the company to the names of the people to the actual way that people interact all together. It feels very 18th century British Empire. Furthermore, the narration's pretty good. It's all done through the eyes of Arthur, the younger of the two siblings, and it adds a lot of color to the story as it's all flavored by Arthur's feelings, from not being able to understand certain things that different aliens tell him, and him just simply saying, I'm not even going to try to put to letters what I just heard, to his general disgust at his sister's romantic inclinations towards the roguish 15-year-old Captain Jack Havoc. And that also brings me to the fact that the jokes in this are actually pretty funny in the way that British comedy is. It's simultaneously dry, but also really wacky. To give a little bit of a spoiler here, there's a part where Myrtle is convinced that the Queen is actually an automaton piloted by one of these white spiders, which are the main antagonist of the story. And in the middle of a big event, she proceeds to push down the Queen and tries to open her head, only much to her dismay finds out that, no, the Queen wasn't actually an automaton. She's just an old lady who looked kind of bored. It's a very silly, silly story. Also, I want to get into a little bit of the world itself. So this story takes place, I believe, in the early to mid 1800s. And they have spaceships that are not powered by warp drives or achieving light speed or uranium. They're powered by alchemy and physics. Basically, Isaac Newton found some way to power these things through nothing but old-fashioned chemistry and math equations, which I find to be hysterical. And in typical British fashion, they have the Academy of Alchemists, which is a very dedicated guild, I believe that was the name of them, that refuse to share the secrets of the wedding chamber with anybody, the wedding chamber being their version of the star drive. It doesn't let them go faster than light, but it does let them travel between planets. In fact, faster than light travel isn't even mentioned. And the world building is very, very odd, and I do like the fact that the villains are a race of giant white spider-like beings. Something that you can understand is honestly monstrous. Let's get into some of the dislikes, though. There's a bit of cultural distance with this book. I didn't get a lot of the references it was making. Granted, this was also made in 2006, and I don't believe the author was intending for it to be read by adults, and especially not non-British adults. It's also probably not intended for all audiences because of this. It's very, very silly in the way that I'd say probably a middle grade book is. And it's very clean. There's not any mention of any kind of lewdness in it. It's also kind of easy to lose track of what's going on in some points. It lags a little bit in the middle. There's some things that feel like they could have been cut, but honestly, most of them were easy to gloss over because the story is just kind of fun and a little bit odd and wacky. I don't really have a long list of dislikes for this book because it's not a very complicated book. So I'm just going to move right into my thoughts. First of all, this book is very pro-imperial and pro-colonialist. So some of the more sensitive people are probably going to have some trouble with it. It really lays heavy into the old school British ideals, which I do enjoy as far as a narrative theme goes. I find it to be enjoyable that the humans are not the bad guys, and the expansion of their empire is not a bad thing. Granted, it's a much more simplified version than the complicated stuff you'd get in with more political books. But it's just a fun little kid story about saving their family and their solar system from giant white spiders. Also, this book genuinely made me laugh, and I can't say that enough because it can be really... Humor can be a difficult thing, and I've had books try to make me laugh and fail miserably, where the comedy just wasn't landing, and this can be said for some movies too. But this had that strange British humor that just makes you laugh from the absurdity of it all. I will definitely be picking up a copy of this for my nephews, who I think are... Well, at least one of them is just about the right age for this book. And with that being said, I'm going to wish you all good luck. Thank you for listening to my review. If you have any books that you would like to hear my take on, please leave them in the description. I do tend to favor indie authors over conventionally published, but I will read whatever I find interesting or whatever captures my fancy. If you would like to read, review, or criticize my own works, I will include a link in the description. Also, please keep the comments civil in the comments section. Also, if you enjoy what I do, please consider giving this video a like, sharing my work, or subscribing to my channel. Thank you.